Hi, Tanya, I'm here.
Good morning, Jamie.
Thanks for your help.
I mean, good afternoon.
I know, I don't even know what day it is, please. Hello, we're both alive. Yay.
Who should I make the host?
Can you make me the host?
Okay.
That'd be great. Thanks. And then I can make Shelby the host if I need to.
Okay.
Oh,
so
and there she is.
So Jamie, you're in the Contra Costa COC, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
With my fancy new account.
Yeah. Well, this is a good opportunity to test it, so it's great.
Yeah. And Shelby, I'll make you co-host too. With the three of us and the one other person that's going to be in here. I think we're all set, Tanya. Thank you.
Perfect.
Be free.
Have a great
Thanks.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Jamie, do you want me to share the presentation or does it not matter?
Doesn't matter. I don't have it up. Do you already have it up?
Have it up so I can just.
Okay, great. I'll pull it up on my end just so I can make sure I remember who is doing what, but. Oh, you know what? Will you just hide slides 7 and 8 with the data since, actually, you know what? We can just leave it. If you just unhighlight it, we'll say, yeah. We can just say that's data from last year. Hey, Gustavo. Gustavo, can you hear us? If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Oh, there we go. Hey.
Sorry.
No worries.
Had a bit of technical difficulties.
Oh, it's all good.
How are you guys doing?
I'm good. I'm glad it's almost Friday again.
It's almost Friday. Yes, it is almost Friday.
How are you?
Good.
Excellent. And we're not expecting anybody else from your team, right? Just you?
Yeah, it's just me.
Okay, great. And Shelby and I will do this sort of assuming you will probably share the slide deck and the recording with your team. And I'll just say there's some data that we weren't able to get in time for this, but I will provide to you after. I'll just tell you when that is.
All right, yeah, no problem. Yeah, I'll share it with the team.
Okay, cool. Shelby, you want to share slides?
Yeah.
Going to be our Vanna today.
Absolutely.
And Gustavo, before we start, I just want to see if you have any questions. We're going to do sort of a basic overview of homeless system of care and how to connect people and all that. And I guess I'll ask if you have questions now, but also feel free to stop us.
Yeah, no problem. I'll let you guys know if I have questions.
Okay, cool.
All righty. Well, welcome to our very small training.
Yes.
We've never done a one-on-one training, so this is fun.
Right.
But this is our standard CE, COC 101 type training that we've done with a couple different providers. And like Jamie said, if you have questions throughout, please just ask. All righty. So this stupid video screen is always in the way of my slide, and I get out of here. So I want to introduce ourselves first. So I'm Shelby Ferguson. I'm the coordinated entry manager for Contra Costa Health, Housing, and Homeless Services. So I manage our coordinated entry system, which you'll be hearing lots about today. And Jamie, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Sure. Jamie, I'm the community engagement specialist. So my role, I always say I'm kind of like on the outside of our system of care facing the rest of the world. So could be city government, could be faith community, could be workforce. So often, if you have questions or if you're looking to make a connection, I'm usually a good person to start with and I can direct you to the right folks.
Awesome.
All righty.
So the goal today is really just to, shall we hit the next slide? Really just to do an overview of our system of care. And the main thing we want to talk about is sort of who's in our system of care, who are we talking about, how many people, what are their demographics, and then talk about the actual system and what kinds of services we're providing. and how to connect to those. So let's talk a little bit about data. So we gather data in a couple different ways, but probably the most reliable is we have something called HMIS, which is our Homeless Management Information System. So I don't know if you guys in workforce have something similar where it's like a shared database of all the providers. So for us, it's all our homeless service providers. And anytime there's a contact, we basically are entering in, you know, Manuel came to see us, and these are the services we provided, and we can see what else they're connected to. And so we can look at that data at the end of the year. So this data is from 2019. We have 2020 coming out. You can see, Shelby, I think if you hit the arrow again, it will, oh, good. So we have, in 2019, we served almost 8,000 people, and these are folks that are literally homeless. So that means it's not that they're couch surfing or like have a bunch of people in a house. It's actually that they're literally homeless and not in a place fit for human habitation. Next slide, please, or next click. So one of the things we know is that we are adding more than 50 people every month to our system of care. So we're like housing people all the time, but we have more people coming into our system than we are getting housed. And the other thing that we see, and this is probably not going to be a big surprise, just knowing what we know about, you know, systemic inequities and racism in our country, we see a really disproportionate number of Black people in our system of care, in the homeless system of care, compared to what we would expect to see in the greater population. So it just means there's big disparities that we see when people are coming in. We are also looking at what happens to people once they're in our system of care, but just wanted to flag that there are big inequities. Go ahead, Joey. So this data, I'm working on getting you more up-to-date data, but this is from July 2019 to June 2020. So specifically thinking about the work you all are doing and this sort of what this grant is that you're working on. We saw about 1,500 folks re-entering that were accessing homeless services. So these are people that are released as a result of AB 109, people on probation, and people on parole. Next slide. And again, this data is a little out of date, but you can see their exit destinations is basically like they hit our system of care and then what happened to them. So you can see about 70 people, I mean, 70% were really missing a lot of data. And that often means that folks just sort of ghost or that we haven't captured data on their exits. We have about 13% that we see positive exits. So that is, you know, permanent housing, but that also includes stably living with friends and family. About 8% of folks are permanently housed. So that means they have their own housing. So this just gives you a snapshot. And part of what this tells us, we're doing a lot of work in our system around better data quality, like the fact that we only have, you know, information on roughly 30% of the folks is not great. So we're working on that too. And about 7% of people are going back to unsheltered homelessness. So the other thing I wanted to flag, and this question comes up all the time, is like, well, how much housing is there? Like, what do you guys have to offer? This is like a lot of information, but the short version is that blue column on the right that says gap or need. And this data actually was pre-COVID, so just know that. But what we can see is that our biggest need is, and there's a lot of code on here, but there's, if you look at exits, there's rapid rehousing, which is RRH. There's permanent supportive housing, which is PSH, and then there's vouchers. Those are basically like housing, types of housing. Permanent supportive housing is the most resource intensive. So it's like basically ongoing rental subsidy and ongoing services. It's for our highest need folks. So people need to be chronically homeless, need to have a disability. So that could be physical or mental health. But basically, these are our most vulnerable people. And just to meet the need that we saw pre-COVID, we needed about 1,200 more units of that. If you look at shelter, you know, this is actually pre-COVID. So this was before we purchased, we have purchased a hotel that's being used as a shelter. So we have a little more capacity. but still there's a big gap also in shelter capacity. So one of the things that happens is people are really frustrated. They're like, well, I'm calling this number, or I'm engaged in these services. Like, why aren't I sheltered, or why aren't I housed yet? Part of it is because there's still really, really big gaps in our system between what we need and what we have. And I'll pause here for a second, Gustavo, to see if you have any questions about like that big picture data piece.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I just kind of want to understand it a little bit more. So the gap / need, is that something that like is that what's missing compared to the number what you guys need?
And it's basically beds, right? So if
Mhm.
you think about like each one of these numbers is like an individual person. So yeah, that basically means if we were gonna, this is again like pre-COVID, if we were gonna actually meet the need, and instead of having 50, adding 50 people to our system every month, if we were
Mhm.
gonna kind of even just keep it at 0, so we housed as many people as came in, this is how many extra beds or sort of units of this we would need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's some big gaps, and this is not unique to us, right? This is the whole Bay Area struggling with this, but we did a deep dive on what our needs were.
Okay.
So, other questions about that?
No.
Okay.
I was just trying to understand it further.
Totally. It's a lot of information. So I'm a fast talker. Feel free to interrupt me, slow me down, have me back up. That's totally fine.
You're doing great so far.
Shelby, this is me, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, great. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is you may already know this, but there are different definitions of homelessness, and those definitions matter when it comes to different kinds of funding. So we, for example, like in our homeless system of care, there may be some funding sources or some programs where like we can't help somebody because they aren't meeting HUD's definition of homeless. So for example, if somebody's couch surfing, like they're, they have a safe place to live, maybe it's not stable, but it's safe. There's some programs that they might not qualify for because they're not literally homeless. HUD gets really strict about that. School districts, for example, tend to be more flexible. So they have programs and services for people that are, for example, category 2, maybe at imminent risk of homelessness, or category 3. And I don't, Shelby, do you have, let me see if I have more, oh yeah. So category 3, that's the education system. So families with children may qualify with homeless, in other statutes too, but like category 3 is basically, it gets like from more restrictive to less restrictive. And then fleeing domestic violence, that's the DV. Basically, even if they essentially if they're trying to flee domestic violence and they don't have any other place to go, there's some specific funding around that population too. Shelby, I don't know if you have anything else you want to say about that.
I think we wanted just to bring to your attention that the people you're serving would probably fall under almost entirely category 1 and maybe category 2.
Right.
Depending on where they're at, but yeah, those would be the 2 categories I would say.
Yeah, that's a great point. So Shelby mentioned, so category 2, like, so somebody that's incarcerated is technically housed, but if they're about to be discharged in a week and they don't have any housing, there's no plan for housing, they would be considered at imminent risk of homelessness. So even though at the moment they're not literally homeless because they're actually like in a facility, they would be at imminent risk.
Okay.
Yep. Go ahead, Shelby. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about some priorities. So this is a kind of complicated picture, but what I wanted to show you is like, we talk about the COC a lot. That's language that you'll hear, if you're engaging with a homeless system of care. That's a fancy way to say like all the things on this page. So that term continuum of care is really a term that the federal government uses to describe like the bucket that they pour money into. So Alameda has their own continuum of care. Marin has their own continuum of care. Around here, pretty much each county is their own COC. In more rural areas, you may have a couple counties that form this thing called a continuum of care. They all have a governing board. So for our county, it's called the Council on Homelessness. And then there's the COC lead agency. So HUD basically says and part of why HUD's so important is they're the funder, like they provide us the majority of our funding for homelessness and housing programs, for homeless housing specifically. So H3, and Shelby and I both work for H3. So that's the county homeless program. We we have our own like homeless programs, but we also have this role, and the role Shelby and I are both in, not sort of in the program delivery, like we're not running shelters, we're not doing core outreach, which you'll hear about. We're actually more on the administrative end and helping kind of coordinate everything that's happening, not just with the county, but with all the other programs and agencies. And so you'll see that light orange bar, those are all the different kinds of services. And there's providers that are providing all of those kinds of services. And Shelby's role is actually to help coordinate all of those. And then we have partners, right? And so you guys, workforce is one of those partners. We've got healthcare, we work with Veterans Affairs, we work with criminal justice and legal services, public safety. So we interact with all these folks. And then there are also stakeholders, and that's a lot of who I actually interact with are these stakeholders. So, cities care about homelessness because it's impacting their cities. There's community organizations, there's community members that are concerned. So these are kind of just like all the players that are concerned about working in sort of touching homelessness in some way. Do you have questions about any of that?
No. So we're part of the partners section.
Exactly.
Right? Okay.
Exactly. And so sometimes what happens in the partners is like, the way I describe the difference between providers and partners is like partners are explicitly working with people experiencing homelessness. They have programs and services, and that's like that's the majority of what they do. Partners may have, that's not their primary focus, but people experiencing homelessness are coming across their radar, or they may have a few programs or funding sources here and there. So school districts, for example, like they don't exist primarily to serve people experiencing homelessness, but they have families that are dealing with homelessness, and they have their own homeless funding and programs to support people that are in their sort of arena. Same thing with workforce, public safety, right? So there's police departments that have homeless focused units, or they're interacting with people experiencing homelessness all the time.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of the difference between the providers and the partners.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. Any other questions about this part?
No.
Okay.
No, we're good.
So, Shelby, is this you or me?
Actually, I'm not sure. Maybe it is me.
That's fine. I'm happy to talk about it. Whatever works.
Okay. You can go ahead, Jamie, and I can talk about what my piece is.
Cool. So this is just a snapshot of basically the whole universe of the services that exist in our homeless system of care. And we have like an interactive map that you could play with if you want to later. I can show that to you. But what I want to point out is in the middle, that yellowish orange bubble has access points. And there are 3 access points for how people can connect to homeless services. It used to be super complicated. And everybody had their own resource list that was getting out of date, and it was a nightmare. What you and your team really need to know is there are 3 access points. So there's call. You can call 211. We're going to talk about that in a minute. You can walk into a care center, which is a brick and mortar physical site that people can walk into. And then there's our core outreach teams. And those are mobile teams that can go out and meet people wherever they are in the county.
Oh, really?
So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Yeah, they're great. So we have, I think, 14 teams now. And so your team, if you have people that are coming across your radar, across your desk or in your office, and they're struggling with homelessness, you have 3 options for how you can direct them. And we'll give you a flyer too that has some of this information. The thing I'll say about 211, I'm always really clear. So 211 is not going to magically solve someone's homelessness. So you pick up the phone and you dial 211. What they are going to do is, instead of having a list of 10 agencies that somebody needs to call and reach out to, and maybe they do, maybe they don't have what they need. 211 is going to ask a few questions, kind of narrow down like what's going on, what might be the best things for you to get connected to, and then give them that information.
Oh,
So they're
okay.
sort of like they're almost like a librarian, right? Where they're not going to do the studying for you, but they're going to get you the right resources so that you can take your next step.
Yeah.
Care centers. So we have one in Walnut Creek and one in Richmond. And those are sites. So Trinity Center is in Walnut Creek. And I don't know if that's a familiar name to you.
What's it
Or
called?
Trinity Center. It's in downtown Walnut Creek. And then GRIP. I don't know if GRIP is familiar to you. They're in Richmond.
I think I've heard more of the Walnut Creek one.
Okay.
I'm not from Richmond, so.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
So those sites are both basically buildings with
Mhm.
staffing and a kitchen and laundry and showers where people can walk in and not just get those basic needs met, but also start to connect to services.
Mhm.
And so we'll talk about that whole universe of services that are surrounding that yellow bubble. And then CORE is the third one, and they're fantastic. So they basically, you get to them by calling 211, and there's a little message that will say, like, if you want to connect to homeless services, or maybe it says, if you want to connect to CORE, push whatever.
Mhm.
CORE has their own dispatchers. And so basically what will happen is, like, say you have a client that you're working with and you're like, hey, you know, I'm working with this guy named Michael. He lives in his car in the parking lot of Walmart in Martinez. And this is the description of his car. And he said he's going to be there from like 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Can somebody go out there and make contact with him? And CORE will say, sure, we can make contact with them or get his phone number, and they will figure out a time and a place to meet this person and basically do an intake and try and figure out, like, what's their situation, what resources do they have, what do they need, and they can actually start connecting them to all the stuff that they might need.
Mhm.
So that's just like a quick piece about the access points, and then we can talk more about the services. But do you have questions about how to connect to those access points?
Yeah, so I just had a quick question about the walk-in center.
Yeah.
So you said there's one in Richmond and one in downtown Walnut Creek?
Yes, and there's nothing in East County. Oh yeah, oh good. So Shelby, I'm stealing your thunder.
Oh.
No,
we're gonna actually talk through some of this.
I think has their information on it.
Oh yeah.
I'll double.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Shelby because she's actually going to talk through some of these things in more detail.
Okay, no problem.
And I will also make sure we get you the address of that. But yes, it's in downtown Walnut Creek.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get all of their information and the flyer too.
I'm going to send the link to the flyer right now in this chat.
Fantastic. So the access points that Jamie's talking about, the center of the circle, the yellow circle is really my universe. That's the stuff that I do. All of those access points, as you can see with the arrows, are pointing to all these other services. But the 3 access points are really my main focus of my work. Okay, so we're going to talk about coordinated entry, or CE for short. So CE sounds like a very complicated thing, because it kind of is. It's not a particular program per se. It's really more about a system or an intervention to make sure that all people who are experiencing some sort of housing crisis have, easy access to our homeless services so they can get connected quickly and efficiently to our system. The goal of coordinated entry is to prioritize the most vulnerable people for our really, really limited resources. Especially limited is housing, as you know. And then individuals, another goal of coordinated entry is that our individuals and families that are coming in can quickly get assessed. They're quickly identified, they're assessed, and then we can connect them to whatever the most appropriate available resource is for them. It doesn't necessarily mean that the best solution will be the first one offered to them, because oftentimes it's not available. So usually it's, what we have available that would closest fit their needs. But just something to keep in mind. keep moving this stupid video around because it just keeps getting in my way. So the populations that can access coordinated entry are, of course, unsheltered. So that's people who are living outside, living in their cars and in tents, encampments, you name it. Those are the people that our core mobile outreach teams are typically connecting with. That's the population they're working with, is the unsheltered. We also have our sheltered population who can access coordinated entry, and those are people who are living in emergency shelters or transitional living, or we also use the term interim shelters, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then the last category is at imminent risk of homelessness. So that means people who are going to be losing their housing within 2 weeks. So what Jamie was talking about before with the definitions, our system doesn't serve people who are, stably housed or in the general at-risk population. So we're not serving people who are couch surfing or can live at their mom's for an extended period of time. This is really people who are really close to losing their housing. Maybe they just got a 3-day notice and they have to vacate. We can serve that population with really specific programs I'll talk about, but generally the two buckets, the unsheltered and the sheltered, are the populations we're working with the most.
Okay.
Yes. And then Jamie talked about our access points, calling 211, our care centers, and our core teams. So our 211 line is for people who are literally homeless, either sheltered or unsheltered, and at risk. So really any population can be accessing 211 if they need a resource. Like Jamie said, it's really a resource line. Our 2 care centers, which are our daytime just drop-in centers, those are open. They have slightly different hours than we originally had on here. Trinity Center is open only Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, so that's accurate. And then GRIP, which is in Richmond, they are open actually 7 days a week, but they're open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. and Saturday and Sunday, 8 to 2, which I can also put in the chat.
Flyer has it. The link to the flyer has the right info.
Perfect. And then those centers, they do typically serve literally homeless, although they can serve at risk. Those centers also, they were in existence prior to being part of coordinated entry. So they do a lot of these drop-in services. What we fund them for is case management. So that's another cool service that you can get at the care centers, is case management. And you can also get connected to a housing navigator, which I'll talk more about in just a little bit. And then lastly, of course, our core mobile outreach teams, like Jamie said, I think we have like 14 teams now. It's just been growing and growing. That is available. At least one of the teams is working 7 days a week. Weekends is pretty limited. And then you can access that, of course, by calling 211, and then I think it's +3 for core. So that is how you access our core dispatch line, and that'll connect the person calling to the closest team to them. So you have somebody in Richmond, they'll dispatch out to the Richmond team. So we have teams that are dedicated to certain cities, to certain parts of the county. It just depends on their funding. Any questions about our access points?
No. I'm glad the flyer the flyer is updated, so it does have the hours for weekdays and weekends.
Okay, fantastic. And our core teams really are doing the basic needs type services, similar to when you drop into a care center, but the core teams are mobile. So they can come out and get people, blankets, cell phone chargers, water, like things they need to be outside. But they also are a big resource to get into shelter. So if somebody is outside, they need those resources, but they also want to get inside, they can help connect them to shelter if and when it's available.
Okay.
Okay, so this is kind of a little map of all of the different services that we offer, specifically homeless services. We have temporary and interim shelters, which I'm going to be talking about. We already talked about our care centers. We have prevention, outreach, which I talked about, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing. We just have general permanent housing. I'll talk about the difference. Housing navigation, which might be the most interesting to you. Rapid resolution, which is a very specific program, which I'll just briefly talk about. And then case management, which I talked a little bit about already. So first, our prevention services. We don't have a ton of prevention in our homeless system of care, which is pretty typical of homeless systems of care, is prevention is a little bit less than, say, the other type of programs. But prevention, just like it sounds, is there to serve people who are at risk of losing their housing. So we have Catholic Charities of the East Bay. They have a prevention program. Shelter Inc. has a prevention program, which you've probably heard of them. And those are really our two main places that do prevention work. And then we also have our rapid resolution program. Part of it is a prevention part where they can serve people who are at that imminent risk, the 2 weeks of losing their housing, and either try to, the whole goal of, prevention is to either keep people in their housing, which would be the main goal, or to, relocate them to another safe housing option. Next is Rapid Resolution, what I just mentioned. That is a program through the Hume Center that we contract with. They have a prevention side of the program, and then they also have another side of the program called Rapid Exit, which is for people who are already homeless, who need to quickly exit our system of care. The prevention side of it is really for people who are about to become homeless and we don't want them to enter our system. So we're trying to divert them from coming in the first place. So that program can be accessed through 211 or our core teams. So 2 of our access points as well as our care center. So all 3 of our access points can refer to this program. So although Rapid Resolution isn't an access point, you are able to access it through one of our access points. So that's one of our programs. I won't get into really specific details about every program because it's too much. But if you have specific questions about any of these programs, let me know.
Okay, no problem.
And then, yes, our lovely care centers. That's a picture of the new Trinity Center. So we have 2 care centers, Trinity Center and Walnut Creek. They are at their new beautiful location right there, downtown Walnut Creek. And then, like I said, they're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4. They have all those drop-in services. It's a really nice place. People can go get meals, showers, charge their phone, all sorts of things, and also get case management. And they can get connected to housing navigation, which I will talk about. And then GRIP does the very same thing. They're just open 7 days a week instead of just Monday through Friday. And they're out in Richmond, so serving the Richmond community. And those are just our physical drop-in centers.
Okay, quick question.
Yeah.
So for example, for GRIP, since it's the one in Richmond, like if I have someone that we're working with that is homeless, they can just drop by there and
exactly.
Okay.
Yep, that's the best part, is they can just drop by anytime between the hours that they're open. If they're wanting a meal, they probably want to go early in the morning or during lunchtime, which I think they both serve between like 11:30 and 1. But yeah, if they just want to drop in to get a shower or maybe see what services they're offering, get connected to a resource, they can drop in anytime.
Oh, okay.
Yep. There's our flyer. That is the updated one. And Jamie, you said you linked it. Perfect.
Yes, I got it.
Yeah, in the chat.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I already said all that information, so I don't think you need any more. They have definitely had to kind of revamp the way they've provided services during COVID, and many of those services have kind of remained that way for now. They are doing a lot of to-go meals still and outdoor dining. Obviously, when they can, they do indoor dining when it's like, hot like it is now. But they do GRIP offers to go dining, which they never did before, and they've just kind of kept it since the pandemic, which has been a really nice thing to offer people. You don't have to come inside and sit down and be around people. You can just take your lunch and leave if you want to. So there have been some benefits since COVID. They've adjusted their services, but yeah, it's really just a drop-in physical place for them to come in.
Okay.
Our outreach teams were specifically talking about CORE, but there's also some other smaller outreach teams in our community, like what is it called, Jamie? SOS. I forgot what it stands for.
Save Our Streets, Richmond.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, so they have a small outreach program. I believe GRIP even does their own small outreach program. So those are the three we kind of have.
Veteran, did you talk about veteran outreach?
Oh, yes. And then SSVF, a veterans program, they have their own outreach as well. So we have multiple places that have outreach. So we're not just talking about our core teams that, we have in H3, but also other programs do outreach as well in a very similar model. They're physically going out and meeting people exactly where they are.
Okay.
Our temporary and interim shelters. So we would normally say emergency shelters, but really if we say temporary and interim shelters, it can encompass a lot more programs. So we've kind of done that name change, but we definitely wanted to talk about our shelters, which are not just our county funded shelters. We have two of those, Concord and Brookside, Concord, and Brookside and Richmond.
And 3 actually with Cali House.
Yes, and 3 with Cali House. You're right, which is our youth shelter. And I will talk about youth services, I think, here in a second. Brookside is not yet open, I believe. I hope that they're opening soon in the fall, but they're not open yet. And then Concord and the Concord Respite Center, the Philip Dorn Respite Center, is also attached to the Concord shelter. They're both open, much limited capacity, of course. But if you hadn't heard, the Concord shelter did a huge revamp, and they made everything a lot more accommodating. So they have more like individual pods, more like rooms rather than a big congregate setting, since we didn't really want to go back to that, which enables us to accommodate couples or 2 adult family members in the same household, which was really nice. And then we also have a little pocket park for pets. So people can bring their pets, which many people who access our shelter services, want to be able to bring their pets. And that's a big reason why they don't, is because, they have their pet and they don't know what to do with them. So we now offer that at our Concord site, which is great. That's a H3 shelter like Cali House is and like Brookside is in our respite center. Also have, other shelters in our community. During COVID, we started Project Room Key, which you might have heard of, which was a statewide initiative that we got hotel rooms to decongregate and decompress our shelters and put people into individualized hotel rooms, keep them safe from contracting COVID. We still have one of those going on. 2 of them closed and we, moved those people out. One of them is still operating. And then we also have a new-ish program that developed out of Project Room Key, which is now an interim program, an interim shelter program called East County Interim Housing Program. That's with our partner BACS, or Bay Area Community Services, a lot of acronyms. But they're out in East County at the old Motel 6 in Pittsburgh, and they run a similar type shelter program. Most shelter programs, are anywhere from 30 to 90 days, just depending on the program. So they run something very similar. And then we did open up our Concord Warming Center, which is also at this Concord site, which is the picture you see. So we have a lot of things at that Concord site. Our Concord Warming Center is a night-by-night shelter. Rather than being able to stay for 30 days at a time, it's just night by night. And that 6 beds, very, very limited. That is our only warming center right now. And then let's see. Oh, and then I did want to mention our shelters do have some capacity to serve 290s or sex offenders. I know Brookside can do that when they're open, as well as Concord, since they don't serve children. And also the East County interim site serves sex offenders as well. We don't talk about that a lot, but I imagine that some of the people that you're working with in a reentry population might be sex offenders. So to keep in mind. Jamie, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. Did you talk about how people connect with shelter?
No.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. Yes. So, and I also just talked mostly about our H3 internal shelters and then BACS's interim program, but there's also other shelters that aren't funded by H3 or contracted by H3. We have Mountain View Family Shelter in Martinez, that's run by Shelter Inc. GRIP has their care center, but they also have a family shelter upstairs. There's the Stand domestic violence shelter They have Love a Child in Bay Point,
Mhm.
and what else? And then Cali House for Youth in Richmond, and Shepherd's Gate in East County as well for women with children. Oh, and Bay Area Rescue Mission, the biggest one. So those are all of our different shelters. The ones outside of our coordinated entry system, those you just, get referrals directly through them. So if you wanted a bed at Bay Area Rescue Mission for a client, you would call them directly, or you can call 211 and get their phone number.
Okay.
But for our internal shelters, our core teams are oftentimes the way to access those. So same with our one warming center. So if you have someone who's looking for warming or a shelter, they can contact 211, press 3 to talk to core. They can say that they're looking for shelter, or you can also call on their behalf.
Mhm.
And core is definitely the way to get connected to shelter for East County Interim Housing Program, Concord Shelter, Brookside Shelter, when it opens, Concord Warming Center, and Cali House. You can call core for youth, or you can call them directly. They do direct referrals as well. And then Mountain View Family Shelter, also through core.
Okay. Which one was the one for youth?
That is next.
Oh.
Yes. So we do have youth services through
Mhm.
our department through H3. It's CCYCS, which is our youth services. We also have our adult services, which I just talked about with our shelters. The youth services, we have Cali House, which is the only youth shelter in Contra Costa. That is located in Richmond, and you can access it by calling this 510 number up there on the screen. And you can call them directly and say, hey, I'm looking for a bed. It's for youth between the ages of 18 and 24, FYI. So it's not going to be like minors. They don't serve minors or anything like that, but they do have very limited beds at Cali House, especially now with COVID. We are able to place multiple people in a room if all of the people in the room are vaccinated. But we find with youth, there's a lot more vaccine hesitancy. So they have to limit their capacity based on who's vaccinated and who's not. So they have pretty limited capacity right now. I think only five or six beds, so very small, but you can call them directly if you wanted to refer someone. And then we also have 2 transitional living programs. Those are one of our few transitional living programs that we have in our entire system. That's
Mhm.
also part of our youth services. Those are located in Mary McGovern is in Concord, and then Pomona is in Crockett. Both of those are transitional programs. Like I mentioned, they're up to 2 years, and they're fairly independent. They come with case management. They get their own room in an apartment. Yeah, and then they get lots of services.
And just to flag one thing to know, Gustavo, is like, as we're talking about, especially like those kind of programs or these housing programs, it's not part of the way coordinated entry works is like you go through these entry points and there's a lot of conversations and assessments and sort of evaluation to figure out if that's a good fit. So it's somebody
Mhm.
couldn't just call up this number and be like, hey, I want to get into transitional housing.
Yeah.
I'm 21 and this is what I want.
Mhm.
And part of why I say that is just so that we can help everybody manage their expectations about what they might get when they're calling these numbers or engaging with these services.
Mhm.
You saw in the beginning, like we have really limited resources. And so part of what we've had to do as a system of care is really triage, like just like they're doing in the hospital. It's like the most vulnerable people are getting connected to these like really resource intensive services. And that means there are a lot of folks that are not actually going to get shelter. They're not going to get housing for a long time. But there are other things that we can be providing in the background while they're waiting for those things. It's not kind of all or nothing. But just to kind of help set the expectations around that, it's super frustrating. We don't like having to triage, but that's kind of the reality about where we are.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I'll just emphasize that a lot, that it's just a starting point, and that
Absolutely.
And
It's a long there'll be a process, just how they go through a process with us.
And the staff is really trained to know about a lot of resources. So there may be stuff out there that, you know, your clients may know like some things that are out there, but they might not know all of them. And that's really what the staff is there for. But also if clients have heard of something, they can ask. And if there's like a specific, you know, entry process or whatever, that's part of what case managers are there to do, is help them navigate all.
Absolutely.
Okay, no problem.
Okay, so those are our youth services that are connected to H3. Like I mentioned, we do have case management. Our system is very limited in case management. I would say overall, that's kind of a gap in our system, is there's not enough overall case management, but we do have case management at our care centers. So if someone drops in, if you have a client that drops in to say GRIP, they can drop in and say, hey, you know, I'd like to get an appointment with the case manager. They do, you know, a standard intake and assessment with the case manager to get enrolled. And then they go through kind of a plan of what exactly they need, what services they're looking for. And then they can help them, you know, maybe all they need is an ID and that's all they're looking for. They can help get them a DMV waiver to get an ID for free. Maybe they're looking for housing, and then we can connect them to our housing navigation program, which I promise I will talk about. I won't keep saying I'm going to talk about it, but that's our case management. There's also case management through county behavioral health. So if you have clients that are connected to a behavioral health clinic, and one of our county behavioral health clinics, they have case managers as well. And then a program called Whole Person Care or Community Connect. They have case managers for people who are high utilizers of our medical system. So there are little pockets of case managers throughout our system, but really specific for very specific populations.
Okay.
Okay, and finally, I'm at housing navigation. So housing navigation is a program run by one of our partners, Hope Solutions. They're a contracted coordinated entry provider. So they started out just, you know, at our care centers, and we've really grown that program, and it's now much, much larger and a little bit more mobile. But that program is basically to help people search for housing, locate housing, and really get into housing. That's kind of the main things that they do. They help get them doc ready for housing. That's something that they can do, help them fill out applications, transport them to go look at a unit, doing all those steps in order to get into housing. And they are, I forgot to mention with Rapid Resolution, but Rapid Resolution and Housing Navigation are two programs that are connected to our Housing Security Fund, which is really a fund to help people just one-time or very limited financial services related to housing. So housing navigation could pay for a house security deposit for someone who's moving in, or that first month's rent that they might need. Or let's say they're working with somebody who needs some work boots to go back to work to then get into housing. They can, it's very flexible, so they can use that fund for that. But the main goal of housing navigation is housing. So the housing navigators can be accessed, that program can be accessed through our care centers. If our care centers, the case managers are working with someone and they identify a housing need, they'll make a referral to the housing navigator if they meet the requirements of housing navigation, which they have to have a minimum income in order to be referred to housing navigation, because they can't work with somebody who doesn't have any income, because there's no way to get them connected to housing. This is really getting people connected to, you know, affordable or market rate housing, which oftentimes looks like a room for rent or a room share, to be completely honest.
And
Okay.
Shelby, I have a question about housing navigation and their, like, sort of what their, sorry, lost command of English for a minute. So basically, like, how much are they doing also helping people like increase their incomes or find better, higher paying jobs slash like connecting with workforce? Like, is there an intersection here with that?
Not really. That's not really the focus or the main focus of housing navigation. That would be a great focus of the case managers at the care center. So that's a perfect example of somebody coming into GRIP. Hey, I want to get connected to case management. You know, I want to go back to work, so I'm looking for employment, and I'm interested in housing. I have a lot of housing needs. So the case manager can work with them on increasing their income and getting employment. The housing navigator, once they get employment, the housing navigator could then work with them on housing, because they do have to have a minimum income in order to start that process.
My other question for you, Shelby, was thinking about rapid resolution and where there's overlap. I might have missed when you were talking about rapid resolution, but if like that's another place where there may be some connection with workforce.
Yes, yeah. So rapid resolution, I would say maybe less so on the prevention side, but maybe somebody lost their job, and that might be the reason that they're about to lose their housing. So they could be connected to workforce services or employment services. I would say that rapid resolution is much more of a program that's connecting people to not just housing resources, but resources that would help them with housing. Even if it's not getting them into a new place or keeping them in their place, they really connect them to all resources in the community. So they had somebody that was referred to them that had employment needs and housing needs. They would work to address all of those needs. So rapid resolution is much more all-encompassing. Housing navigation is really specific to housing.
Okay.
Yeah. So housing navigation, like I mentioned, can be accessed at our care centers, our drop-in centers. Those case managers are at Trinity Center, they're member advocates. They know how to refer to housing navigation. And then our shelters can also now refer to housing navigation. So if they're working with somebody who is in a shelter and, you know, they got a job and they really just need help finding housing, a lot of our shelters don't have capacity to help get people connected to housing, or not enough for the amount of people in shelter. So that's a great resource they can tap into. And then our core teams can also refer to housing navigation. So oftentimes our core teams encounter people who are living in their cars and they have a full-time job and they just need help getting back into housing. That happens a lot more than we think. That's a great time where they refer to housing navigation, and they're able to help get them a room for rent or something. That's kind of what housing navigation does.
Okay. Quick question. Is there kind of like I don't know how to say, kind of like is there a way for them not to qualify because they make too much money, or?
Good question. I don't think they have any income limits. But you know, if someone could locate housing on their own, they, you know, have the means to do so, then they wouldn't expect a referral from someone like that. But typically we don't ever have anyone who meets a high income. Yeah. So and also, you know, if they had a higher income, then maybe they could actually afford a 1-bedroom apartment. Most of the people they work with, really all they can afford is room for rents. But yes, as far as I know, there's not a specific income limit. The minimum for individuals that they ask is $800 income, because that's kind of like just the starting point to get into a room for rent. And then for families, they say about 1,000 would be the starting point.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions about housing navigation specifically?
Shelby, I have one thing. So like typically if somebody's going to work with them, where are they working remotely? Are they physically meeting people someplace?
You're absolutely right. Yes. So they are very much mobile now. They are able to be accessed obviously through the care centers and core and our shelters. But once someone has been assigned to their caseload, they go out and meet the person. They can do services via phone. Most of our services we're able to do via phone, even core during the pandemic. So we've kind of kept some of that because it's been helpful. But they actually will go out and meet the person at, you know, maybe they're staying at a shelter. They'll go meet them at the shelter. They'll do an intake just like core would, and then they'll work on some sort of housing stability plan to figure out where they want to go next. But yeah, once they get someone assigned to their caseload, they'll go out and meet them.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah. And there are 4 housing navigators, and caseloads are about 30. So at any given time, there's about 120 people that can be served in housing navigation. So there are limits, a limited resource, but it's available.
Okay.
As far as housing resources go through coordinated entry, we also have rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing was integrated into our coordinated entry system back in like 2019, so just right before the pandemic. Our rapid rehousing programs are, temporary rental assistance, subsidy assistance, and case management. So the thing to note about these programs is that, they're temporary, they're short term. They're really for people who either already have enough income or can quickly get enough income to sustain on their own, or people who have employment history, or they have some sort of ability to increase their income to be able to pay full rent on their own. So this is a lot of times people who lost their job for a little bit or lost their benefits. They're getting them back. They're getting back on their feet, and they just need a few months of assistance. That's really what this type of program is for, not for people with intensive service needs, people who might need wraparound support for mental health or substance use, things like that, case management needs. This is really for people who, in about 6 to 12 months could probably live independently without any case management services or rental subsidy services. So we have quite a few rapid rehousing programs now. Typically those are for adults, and then we have some that are specific. We have one that I'll talk about that's specific for AB 109 population. We have some specific for veterans, but yeah, for the most part, those are all serving adults. The eligibility criteria for rapid rehousing is they have to be homeless, and they have to meet that category 1 definition that Jamie was talking about, which is literally homeless. So we're not talking about people couch surfing or, at imminent risk even. They have to literally be homeless, sheltered or unsheltered in order to qualify for rapid rehousing, just the HUD requirements for these projects. And then for some people, we put them into rapid rehousing, knowing that they might need something more long-term, but this goes back to what I was talking about in the beginning. Sometimes the best thing for them isn't available right then, and we need to get them into housing. So we have sometimes put people into rapid rehousing with the idea that we will quickly transition them into a permanent program once that becomes available. So for those people, if they meet the chronic homeless definition and they have a disability, that we can document upon their enrollment into a rapid rehousing project, then we could move them on to a permanent supportive housing project, which I'll talk more about, so that's not so confusing. Our transitional housing programs are very limited. Transitional housing is not funded by HUD anymore. It's not really seen as a best practice, as you will, for housing anymore. So the only transitional housing programs we have are our transitional living programs for youth. And then STAND, they have a domestic violence specific transitional program. Any others, Jamie? Those are the only ones I could think of, just for youth and for domestic violence survivors.
There might be some veteran programs, but not, yeah.
I think you're right. Yeah. So veteran services, they also have a couple, I think, transitional programs, more like GPD, I think. So those are really for really specific populations, for youth, for people fleeing or experiencing domestic violence, and for veterans. And typically transitional programs are 1 to 2 years of rental assistance plus case management. Oftentimes they come with case management, and then oftentimes they have a savings plan component where the person is expected to, save as much money as they can from either their benefits or their earned income in order to be able to move on from that type of housing. So it's not just like a 2-year stopgap and then they have nothing else.
Yeah.
The hope is that they're saving money.
And Gustavo, one thing I'll just add here, because this has been a change just even since I started working in homeless services like 6 or 7 years ago. So HUD, as I said, is like our biggest funder. I think part of what they realized, the idea used to be like, you have to get people ready for housing. And you don't want to put them into housing until they're ready or they're going to fail. And so there was this idea like you put people into transitional housing and then you get them ready and then you move them into permanent housing. And I think what the thinking that shifted is like the solution to homelessness is permanent housing. And you can move people straight from the street into their own housing and you bring the resource and services to them.
Mhm.
Because part of what happens with transitional housing is it's like one more disruption. So typically for transitional housing, it's like people are learning some very specific skills, or, you know, as Shelby said, it's like either they're like working through trauma of DV, or they're young adults and are really working, like building those sort of adult skills. Sometimes also with like substance use, but generally the idea is like the solution to homelessness is housing. And we don't need to make people jump through a bunch of extra hoops. And I just get a lot of questions about this in the community about like, why is that? Why don't you have this? It seems like a great idea. And for some folks, it really is. But we don't have very much of this in our community. And that's why.
Oh, okay.
All right. Next is our most needed. The biggest gap that you saw is permanent supportive housing in our system, because we are finding so many vulnerable people who really need permanent support with rental assistance and case management. So permanent supportive housing is permanent support. That means permanent rental assistance and permanent case management. So this is really for people who need that support for an extended period of time, maybe even forever. And that's case management. Oftentimes these programs have employment supports and come with other types of services, sometimes mental health related, or mental health case management or therapy. And then this is for individuals. We have some family permanent supportive housing programs. So it's really targeted based on the specific population, but these are, like I said, it's permanent rental assistance. And typically they pay 30% of their income towards rent if they have income, but not a requirement. And then another thing to note for permanent supportive housing is they have to meet some pretty specific definitions in order to qualify. So just to give you an idea, it's not that anybody can qualify for permanent housing if they need it. It's really for people who meet two definitions. One, that they're chronically homeless, which means that they've been sheltered or unsheltered for a year or more, 12 consecutive months, or they've had 3 or more episodes, or is it 4 or more episodes? I can't see my screen. 4 or more episodes totaling 12 months in the past 3 years. Most people will just meet that first 12 consecutive months for chronically homeless. And the second is that they have a permanent disability that can be documented. So it can't be something like, you know, they're going through a domestic violence situation. That's not a permanent disability. It would be, you know, something hopefully temporary. But a permanent disability would be something like a physical health, a chronic physical health condition, or let's say a mental health condition, like they have, you know, severe anxiety or depression, PTSD, those kinds of things. Those would qualify as disabilities. So they have to meet those two things in order to even qualify for permanent supportive housing. And like Jamie said, just to be completely upfront, we have very little permanent supportive housing available. And permanent supportive housing doesn't come open often because the people moving into it typically need that support for a long, long time, and don't move on very often from that support. So we see very few openings in this type of housing, even though it's the most needed. And I'll talk a little bit more about it, but we, for all of our services, like we've been talking about, we're prioritizing the most vulnerable, and I'll talk about kind of how we do that, but definitely so for permanent supportive housing.
Okay. Question.
Mhm.
For permanent disability, what would fall under kind of like some general?
Yeah, so permanent disability could be a mental health, a physical health, a chronic physical health, or a developmental disability that can be signed off by a licensed clinician. So doctor, nurse, therapist. So it could be maybe they have severe anxiety or depression. Maybe they have a chronic health condition or a developmental disability. So, or something like HIV or AIDS, that also counts under chronic health. We get a lot of people who are HOPWA, HIV or AIDS. So that's another category that could count. There's a lot of disabilities that can count as permanent. There's only a few that might, you know, not count as permanent, but typically. typically most of the disabilities that the people were serving are permanent disabilities.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. Okay, and then the next is permanent housing, which I know sounds like what I just talked about, but what I just talked about was permanent supportive housing with supportive services. Permanent housing is really more of like affordable housing or market rate housing or vouchers. So we do have some of that in our community, and we're definitely getting more as far as vouchers are concerned, like through our housing authority, our local housing authority. But this is really, it's a permanent housing, but it comes with no services. So it's for people who can either afford market rate rent or qualify for a voucher of some kind. But they don't come with any sort of supportive services. So it's for people who can live independently or fairly independently. They can take care of their activities of daily living, things like that.
Okay. And then is this still qualify just for like the homeless, right?
Yeah, so permanent housing, a lot of times what I'm talking about is affordable housing in our community. So we have some affordable housing providers that we often refer people to their wait lists. And I can actually send you those, the few that we use in our community. They have their wait lists posted online, and you can actually sign up to get notification of when one of their wait lists opens up. And then you can sign people up. But yeah, it is typically for people who are homeless. Some of them are, though, for people who are low income that aren't necessarily homeless. It just kind of depends on the site. But typically the rent is 30% of their rent, just like the permanent supportive housing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would take the information.
Yeah, definitely. It's really helpful to have, especially for your staff. If you want to do some of that housing search on your own, that's a great place to start.
Okay.
And then just to be uber clear, our usual prioritization for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, like I talked about through coordinated entry, is our general population. So, everybody we're serving in our homeless system of care that's getting an assessment. Right now, or really since August of 2020, when we opened up our Project Room Key hotels, we changed our prioritization process, or we amended it temporarily to be serving people at the hotels. Right now, we only have one, so it is dwindling down, but that's still our process. So right now, any housing that becomes available through coordinated entry, we are prioritizing all households in our one Project Room Key hotel that's still left. And then from there, we go based on their VI SPDAT score, which I actually didn't talk about, which I think I should, and their length of time homeless. So that's our general process. Our VI SPDAT is our vulnerability assessment. If you haven't heard of it, every community who has coordinated entry, they have to use some sort of standardized assessment tool to be able to prioritize people for the very limited resources that they have. Our community, like very many communities in the US, have chosen VI SPDAT. It's a evidence-based tool. It's well researched. It's been used for a really long time. And also there's not really something better. So that's what we're using right now. And that's our housing needs assessment. So that's how we determine, people's vulnerabilities. It was a tool that was developed by an organization called OrgCode that we use for, we have a youth one, we have a family one, and we have a singles one. So we do that assessment on people who are literally homeless. So that means in the unsheltered or sheltered category. This is not for people who are at risk, because it's basically trying to determine their vulnerabilities, being on the street. And actually what it's mostly trying to determine is like how likely they are to die on the street is really what we're looking at. Yeah, so they ask really, really intense, vulnerable questions. It is a fairly lengthy assessment, but that's our only way to really be able to figure out people's vulnerabilities and be able to rank and prioritize them based on those vulnerabilities for our so limited housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is this done by the case manager or?
Great question. Yes. So our VI SPDATs can be done by our core teams. Our core teams are trained to do VI SPDATs out in the field. We typically do them in person because they're very personal, but
Yeah.
because of COVID, we adjusted to doing them over the phone as well. So they can be done over the phone, typically in person. So they're done by our core teams. They can also be done at a care center with a case manager. So that's one of the things that if you have a client who drops into GRIP and gets connected to a case manager, within the first few times of meeting them, they'll probably do this VI SPDAT assessment just to see where they're at and then kind of get them on our list for housing, because this VI SPDAT is really the ticket to getting on the list for housing. And that's how we prioritize folks.
Okay.
Yep. But those are the two main places. Emergency shelters can also do VI SPDATs, but definitely two of our access points are well equipped to do those.
All right. Awesome.
Okay. Any questions? That was a lot of information.
I'm just trying to think here.
And you'll probably think of more later. So if you can't think
Yeah,
of
I
anything
probably
right now,
will.
yes, we can put our contact information if you don't already have it in the chat. So you can contact us should you have questions. If it's related to, what I presented on coordinated entry, housing specific, you can direct those questions to me. But if it's more, Jamie, what would you say would be good questions for your side of the house?
I think if you have questions about like how to connect your programs with sort of outside partners, or if you're looking to understand more about like the big picture system, when in doubt, start with me and I can connect you in. But if it's sort of about providers, homeless service providers, Shelby's your gal.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think it'd be great to get involved in both sections. Just because it's kind of the people we help, we provide for, and it's a different range of people, but also I feel like getting more involved in any way we can help as well would just be really good as well.
Great.
So I'll think of questions. I'll definitely have more questions about housing just because we have a lot of 18 to 24-year-olds that we're actually getting into the program, and
that's what I figured. Might have some young
great.
people,
and they're kind of homeless or they're running here and about. So that'd be amazing to learn. But we also have a lot of people that are just being released and they're joining our program as well that kind of are trying to turn their life around. So it'd be great.
We have some programs for that, which I realize is at the end, and I haven't even talked about them yet. So let me get into those first before we just, completely end this, because I'm over here like, I think this is the end, and I forget we have a specific section for you.
Okay, no problem.
But yeah, I just wanted to briefly talk about our reentry specific housing programs, because we do have several, and I don't think they're well known. So it's definitely something I wanted to flag for you that might be a potential resource for your clients. So the first one we have, they're also very specific, but if you have anybody in these categories, the first program that we have that I wanted to talk about was our Housing Navigation Probation program. So that is a program with Hope Solutions, who does our general housing navigation through coordinated entry, and the probation department of Contra Costa. So the way people get referred into that program is through the probation department. So their probation officer has to make that referral for them. It's for people who are homeless or at risk. So they do serve at-risk population, and they're on probation in Contra Costa. That's the criteria, or the people that they're serving. It's for people who have housing needs, and they provide housing navigation. And I definitely should have said, and they also do employment support. So Hope Solutions is the provider that's providing the housing navigation. So they're doing the search and location. They're also they also have a employment specialist that they use for this program as well, to help people who are on probation in that reentry population get back to work if they're interested in that. A lot of the places that they're placing people in are like SROs or SLEs, things like that. And they can help pay for rent. It's pretty flexible. They can help pay for rent, security deposits, uniform to get to work, boots to get to work. I think even minimal like transportation, like bus passes, things like that. But that's for people who are on probation, and their probation officer is the one that refers them. So if you do have anybody who's on probation, who it needs housing, that might be a resource to tap into. And if they're wondering about it, they can ask their probation officer, and they're all pretty well equipped, and they know about this program.
Okay, no problem. Well, yeah, I think we have a few, so
Yeah,
that'd be great.
Okay, the next program is with Shelter Inc. It's their AB 109, I should have said Rapid Rehousing Program. So this is even more specific for people who are on AB 109 probation. So, and they're also homeless or at risk. They can serve out risk as well. Those referrals can go directly to this email that I linked in here. For their reentry programs, they have two, so this is one of them. And they have a referral form, which I can send you actually afterwards, that they have you fill out and just send to that email address. But yeah, these are people who are on AB 109 probation, which I know is a smaller population, and they're homeless at risk. And the services that they provide is housing search and location, just like the Housing Navigation Probation Program. They're typically putting people in SROs and SLEs, same kind of thing. So they're doing the housing search and location with them. They also provide case management support, and they as well have employment support. So most of our reentry programs have some level of employment support because oftentimes that population that they're working with is interested and able to go back to work, and that's a good way for them to increase their income. So that's another. This is a rapid rehousing program, the Housing Navigation Probation Program. It's not rapid rehousing, but it is temporary. It is short term. The AB 109 rapid rehousing program is typically, like all rapid rehousing programs, 6 to 12 months of assistance, and in the hopes that they would be able to gain permanent housing in that time period.
Okay. Yeah, I think they'll definitely come in handy with some of our graduates from our program.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because we kind of help them as much as possible to kind of get into the trades and help them as much as possible to get them their first job. And then sometimes they don't have like a place to go or a place to live like after they're done working. So it'd probably be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we also have what we call our HIP program, or our Holistic Intervention Partnership. That is a newish program with, it's a partnership between Contra Costa Public Defender's Office and the Hume Center, who runs our Rapid Resolution Program. Again, this is a pretty specific population, but it's for people who are working with the Public Defender's Office. They have a public defender. They're also either homeless or at risk, and they need some sort of housing help. So this program, they offer rapid exit or prevention services, which is the rapid resolution. So they help get them connected to housing or help keep them in their housing if they're unstably housed. They also do housing search and location if they need that, and they provide case management support. Just like Hume does with rapid resolution, for this HIP program, they really connect them to any and all resources that they need. So if they needed employment support, they don't offer a lot of those kind of services in-house. They'll refer them out to a place that does employment services, or they need connected to a behavioral health clinic. Maybe they need some mental health support. They'll get them connected to a clinic. So they do a lot of the resource connecting, but this is for people who are working with the Public Defender's Office, so pretty specific.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then last but not least, you might have some people in this category, but again, very specific population. This is Shelter Inc.'s Positive Futures program. It is also a rapid rehousing program. It's not permanent, so it's temporary. You can send the referral form to their referrals inbox, but it's for people who have been recently released, so within the last 6 months, from state prison, California State Prison, and they're either already homeless or they're at risk of becoming homeless. And they do the same thing as the other programs. They do housing search and location. They offer case management support and employment services. So very specific population, but if any of the people you're working with are re-entering from state prison, this might be a great place to connect them to.
Okay. And then is this the same as they provide services or they help for like 6 to 12 months or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's about 6 to 12 months of assistance. So that's why these type of programs have employment arms of their programs, because they're hoping that they're working with people who are employable and can increase their income. So that's one of their main services, is they offer employment support so they can increase their income enough to be able to sustain rent on their own, whether that's a room for rent, an SRO, staying in an SLE, or even their own apartment, but whatever that looks like for them.
Okay, got it.
Yep. So those are our re-entry specific housing programs. Again, they're so specific, AB 109, people on probation, people coming from state prison, and then people working with the public defender's office. So if you have anybody in those categories, you can definitely send referrals that way, or you are welcome to ask me if you have a question about one of those programs. And then we just list our general resources here of how to contact me, how to contact Jamie, our CE flyer, which Jamie already linked, and then the link to our website.
Awesome.
Any questions?
I always see talking to us as like drinking from a fire hydrant. So I know that was a
It really
huge
is.
amount of information in a
Yeah.
short period of time. That's why we're
No.
recording it and we have the slides. So
Yeah. Am I gonna have access to these slides by any chance?
Yeah.
Or
we'll send that to you, and we'll send you the link to the recording as well.
Okay, no problem. Amazing. No, I mean, yeah, it was a lot of information, but I mean, it's very helpful information. So I mean, anything like this, it's just something I like to learn about. So it's interesting.
Good.
Something I care about. And
And if you have like a staff meeting or a group of folks that you feel like need this information, let me and Shelby know, and we can do this for a bigger group if that feels useful.
Yeah, I'll see if we can maybe you can set something up for a bigger group, but just for now, it'd be me.
Okay.
And then if there's any new information coming out soon or anything.
Yes, in fact, I'm gonna drop a link in here, and you should sign up for our newsletter. So we have a couple of different mailing lists. So I'm going to send you the link, and you can decide the kind of information that you want. But I send out a monthly newsletter that's got all kinds of information that might be useful to your.
Okay, awesome.
So you can just set the preferences for whatever you want. I
would definitely subscribe to some of these.
Excellent. And it comes through Constant Contact, so just know that with your spam filter sometimes.
Okay. Yeah, it's no problem.
Yay.
All right.
Boom. Done.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. Very helpful.
Good.
Let us know if you have any questions.
And yeah, I'll definitely probably be sending you guys emails. Probably asking a whole bunch of questions, but
good. That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.